Hello, everybody, and good evening, and welcome to another episode of hashtag What's Next here on Open Dialogus. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us for the next 60 minutes as we tackle the big issue, the Conservatives. What do they actually conserve? So we're gonna have hopefully a very interesting discussion in this one. So pull up a seat, sit back, and relax. As you can see, I'm joined with three excellent guests tonight. I'll actually introduce Dan Emmerson, who is the founder of Open Dialogus and political commentator, and it's the first time he's actually joined us in this format. You're very welcome, Dan. Can I also introduce Bill Etheridge? Again, Bill's pretty much a regular face on this channel. Bill, of course, is UKIP's economic spokesman, former MEP, and a veteran political commentator, if I can say that without making you sound too old, Bill. And then finally, I'm very pleased to have back Godfrey Bloom, who again has been in previous several of our previous discussions. Godfrey, as you know, former CEO of a successful life insurance company, a research economist. Very much, I think, Godfrey, it would be fair to say you're a man driven by facts and numbers, which I might say is a bit of a rarity in 2021. So it's very good to see you on the channel as well. So, gentlemen, let me kick off on this one, if I may, by saying that, you know, it's all very, very well to criticize the Conservatives because they're not this, they're not that, and they're not the other. But here's the deal. People in the UK have only got two choices. They vote Labour or they vote Conservatives. So I put it to you. I'll go around you one by one. Start with you, Dan. What is your, I mean, it's not perfect, but hey, listen, the Tories are better than anything else. So what are you complaining about?
Well, I think I think you've just hit the nail on the head. This is a two-party state country, which has served us. If you just look at our relationship with the European Union, for example, we've had the country has voted since 2014 in every election that is so two European elections for the European Parliament, to which Godfrey is and Bill are former MEPs of, yep. And the country has voted a majority to leave the European Union. But the Conservative Party have done everything that they can. We know that. Everything that they can since 1970 about lying, putting us in the first place, to then taking 4 years to take us out. Yes, Boris and the Conservative Party have taken us out. But, you know, and I don't want to dwell on Brexit, but let's be clear, they were forced to. They were forced to. If you look at the 2019 polling up until the EU elections, UKIP, which was really surprised me, UKIP were getting trashed on every media outlet, racist this and racist that, and yet they still creeped up on one of the polling to 13% in the polls. You know, I think there's a large majority of what I would call conservative British public that are basically politically homeless. The Conservative Party now, just look at what's happened. They've been in power, albeit a coalition in 2010 to 2015. But look what's happened to our country. It's almost illegal now to say your opinion on social media. You know, we have thought police in this country. Yeah, we've had 10 years of a conservative government, and we're turning more and more. Forget about COVID. We're turning more and more and more into North Korea. Just to put it to the extreme. And this is 10 years of conservatives. So that's my problem. I like what I was brought up. You know, British. I love Scotland. I love Ireland. I love Wales. And when I listen to Parliament, I hear all of those names mentioned, all of those, nations mentioned, but I don't hear England. I am a nationalist to a degree, but I think I'm being tuned that way because I think England has been neglected by the Conservative Party for a best part of 10 years.
Godfrey, can I turn to you with a slightly different sort of twist on that one? Isn't the truth of the matter that the Conservatives are a very clever party, because they very successfully took UKIP's clothes, and Boris is the guy who's going to be credited in history as the Prime Minister that took the UK out of the European Union. So 3 cheers for good old Boris, Godfrey. And, again, surely the Conservatives have delivered. They got Brexit done, Godfrey. So what can you complain about?
Well, I'm not really so much interested, for the purposes of this discussion, to talk about what they might have done at Christmas. I don't believe that takes us anywhere, frankly. I think what we need to do is we need to look at what conservatism is. We need to look at what we believe the role of government to be. And yes, where the Conservatives have lost their way, and I would suggest they've lost their way since before the war. This is a very long-term degradation of the Conservative Party and conservatism. And I go back to the days of Lord Salisbury, which was the most successful Conservative government in history of Conservative governments. And not only do I believe that, the numbers crunched show that towards the end of the Industrial Revolution. And of course, that accolade was given by Clem Attlee, of all people. So I think it's generally understood across the board. And I've got a whole list of wonderful quotations here from Lord Salisbury from the 1890s, which are all completely apposite today. And we might come to them later in the programme, because I'm quite sure you will enjoy them, and so will the listeners. And these quotes, this speech I was going to give from these quotes at Cambridge University, Robinson College, to the Conservative Association, I was banned from campus. I was banned from Cambridge University because talking about Lord Salisbury's administration of 1890s is too radical for the young Cambridge mind these days. So that's pretty fascinating stuff. But basically, it's about the role of government. It's about the role of government. And nobody hit it more on the head than Lord Salisbury of that time, to say the role of government, his belief in the role of government was that the government is there to simply facilitate the entrepreneurial spirit of the British people and get out of their way. And the main role of government is defense of the realm. And that is when we were at our most successful, where the empire was huge, people's livelihoods got better in the Industrial Revolution. It's when government gets out of the way. Now we have 120 years on, 120 years on, we have a government that actually decrees whether you can have a 2-for-1 buying system at Tesco's. You know, they're actually micromanaging what happens in the supermarket. So what I would suggest, just before I wind up on this little bit, what we're dealing with the Conservative Party is, we're dealing with a socialist party. The modern Conservative Party is a socialist party. And what they actually say is, and the reason that people vote Conservative in elections is because the Conservative Party simply say, look, we're socialists, the Labour Party is socialist, but we can manage socialism better than they can. And that's what people vote. They say, yes, we're a socialist government from that. We have a socialist government. Well, this government is totally socialist, but they claim that they can manage it better. That's been blown out of the water in the last 6 months.
Well, okay, but Bill, interesting points there, Godfrey. But okay, so is it a question I'll put to you then, Bill? Is it a socialist electorate?
Well, I think it's an electorate that's been conditioned to go down a certain route. And I think I'd start from this discussion as having once been a member of the Conservative Party and actually stood for a local council election for them. And because I grew up under the impression I was a Conservative. But what I've realised since is I wasn't. I was a Thatcherite, which is totally different to being a Conservative in the terms of the British Conservative Party. And since then, I've probably realised I'm probably more of a libertarian than any of those things. But the reality of it is we have a country that for many, many years, with the blip of the Great Lady, has been going down a socialist route. The Conservative Party, one thing it does brilliantly well, better than anybody, is win elections. That's all it's for. It isn't there as a a principled vehicle to put forward proper political views, to radically change things, to put forward what they truly believe in. It's there so that people like David Cameron, Boris Johnson, and the line of succession can get to Downing Street. And that what they'll do is they'll follow the consensus of the day. We had all those years of Blair and Brown, and then we've had since then a decade of Tories more or less in charge, and they've gone down the same route because it's popular. Because giving people free jelly and ice cream on a Wednesday is popular. Giving people something for nothing is popular to those vast majority of people who don't actually spend time thinking about political theory and principle or even consider freedom anything other than a strange buzzword. Those people, all they think is, oh, I've got more money in my pocket now because of these lovely handouts that we get all the time. So they followed that route. So I understand Godfrey's assessment of them being socialist. In effect, they are, but it's not a principled position. It's simply, the electorate is used to handouts. It's used to a comfortable being given everything. And the Tories have thought, well, let's do that really well to stay in power. It's not because they believe in it. They don't believe in a damn thing. They are an empty vessel, a moral vacuum. They believe in nothing.
Yeah, I think, that's interesting, Bill. Dan, the one thing that the Conservative Party is kind of, I guess, people do associate with it very much. I'm interested in this from all three of you, by the way. So I want all your views on this. Is a prudent management of the economy. That's we saw that the spendthriftery of the Blair years, the Brown years, all of that. It's and going back in history before that. But the Tories are always sound on money. They look after the economy. They create jobs. Well, so the story goes anyway. But I think if we looked at the books at this point in history, they're probably the worst books you could ever see. So do you think, Dan, that the incredible economic mismanagement that we've seen under Rishi, do you think that could do for the Tories? Or again, going back to Bill's point, as long as they're getting their free lunches for kids who don't go to school, does it even matter?
My gut instinct is that the latter of basically the end of what you said is spot on. The electorate are very fickle. There's nothing better than freebies. Nothing better. We all like freebies. Yeah, all of us. We all like freebies. I mean, if you look at when the Conservative Party came into power in 2010, I believe the national debt and Godfrey, you'll be able to correct me if I'm wrong, was about 800 billion. Was it knocking on the door of $1 trillion? Is that right?
It's doubled. It's doubled since 2010 to
correct,
2019.
Correct.
I'm not including this year.
Yeah. So in David Cameron's term from 2010 to 2015, I believe it finished on around 1.5 trillion. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
That was under 5 years of a coalition government, and then we go to 2015 to 2019. There are you've hit the nail on the head. They are a socialist party. They chuck money around like it's confetti. The problem is for all of us here and for our viewers watching, we all know somebody's got to pay the bill.
Well, Godfrey, that's really the point, isn't it? Every realistic person understands that if you keep splurging the cash, one day the bill comes in. So the bill has to come in. I mean, one of the things that surprised me most was I couldn't believe that the Chancellor would have extended the furlough scheme beyond August, given the economic consequences of that, in terms of the borrowings. But it doesn't seem to matter a damn to him. So it's spend for this modern so-called Conservative Party, isn't it, Godfrey?
Yes, because, and I'll tell you why, that most people don't make any association in their minds with what a government spends and how it can affect them. And of course, it affects them mainly in the degradation of money rather than taxation. Although there's an interesting stats, and here I go nerdy again. Up until 2019, the national debt has doubled under the Conservative government. But interestingly enough, taxation is at its highest level for 50 years. under a Conservative government. Now, this is fascinating. They've been in office since 2010. And if you look at your Taxpayers Alliance, that's where you'll find all the figures on the Taxpayers Alliance. But what is interesting is how dishonestly they actually bring forward the figures. So they do not present the government accounts under international accounting standards, as they would have to do if it was a limited company. In fact, the way the budget is produced by the Chancellor and previous Chancellors would be illegal if they were the managing director of a United Kingdom company. Illegal. They would go to prison. But the biggest thing that's not on the list is the public sector pension commitment. Yeah. Public sector pensions are now around about $750 billion, and they don't even show up in the books. So when they say, and they come along and they say, and all the chancellors have done this, Osborne before him and prior to Osborne, they say, yes, but our national debt is only about 85 or 90% of GDP, which is in line with the rest of Europe, so on and so forth. But of course, if you take the real accounts into consideration, it's actually well over 200% of GDP, which is about the same as Greece. But of course, no financial journalists understand how to read a set of accounts, because mainly they're thick. I mean, the only two people who've got any idea are Liam Halligan and Alistair Heath. And of course, they're bound with hoops of steel to the Conservative Party and the Conservative press. But these accounts would not last 5 minutes in a court of law. All previous chancellors should go to prison because they're crooks and liars and cheats. But of course, if the mainstream media don't understand how the game is played, they're never going to go.
I cannot believe you're calling George Osborne a cheat and a liar. I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
Yeah, but it's interesting, Godfrey, because so what you're saying is because the public sector pension, those huge monies are basically off balance sheet, that makes it look better than it actually is. That's what you're saying. That's the key point.
Yeah. I mean, I spent 35 years in the City of London. I can cheat figures like you'd never believe. I know how it's done, and I know when somebody else is doing it.
I mean, but there again, Bill, the thing is that the conservative party, it's supposed to be a party which encourages the entrepreneur, which encourages the private sector, which actually, to be fair, did happen a bit during the Thatcher years, a lot more anyway than it had previously. But it seems to me at the moment the Conservative Party don't give a toss about the private sector, the small business person. In fact, actually, they appear to me, Bill, to be destroying them.
As with every other government across Europe and soon to be in the United States, they're enthralled to global corporations. They have no interest whatsoever in small to medium-sized business, and literally none. If they did give a damn, they wouldn't have gone through all of the madness of the last nearly 12 months now. Yeah. And they wouldn't be thinking that you can keep a bar or restaurant open on £1,000 handouts. These kind of things just demonstrate their lack of any interest whatsoever in small to medium-sized business. Because as with all of the global political elite, they are in the pocket of the money men. Everything is about following the money. It's one of Godfrey's catchphrases, actually. I'm sorry to borrow that off you, but, to follow the money. It's quite apparent. And my, 5 years out there in Europe, when I saw what was going on with the lobbying and all the rest of it, it's quite apparent that the same thing happens here. And, everything that goes on from government policies, not just ours, every government across the so-called free world now, they're all in the pocket of global corporations. Not one of them does things from principle or from a view of trying to improve life for the small to medium-sized businessman. In fact, the small to medium-sized businessman's a bit of a pain to them. They'd rather they weren't there.
Yeah, but the thing about that, Bill, is the small to medium-sized business person is the backbone, or has been anyway, the traditional backbone of the British economy. So how does that work?
Well, absolutely. That's the whole point, really, because what they're destroying isn't just this concept of the small to medium-sized businesses. They're destroying the social mobility that comes with it. As I said earlier, I was a Thatcherite, and I grew up during that period of time where my family and people we knew came from working class backgrounds to come to a point where there were homeowners, business owners, share owners. It's a beautiful vision. It's a beautiful dream. Hark back a little bit to when William Hague made that speech before he became the sort of monstrous corporate shill that he is now. You know, when he made that speech, that summed up the reality for a lot of people during that time. That's what real conservative or Thatcherite values actually allows. It allows people to rise from humble beginnings on hard work, effort, and skill and talent to get somewhere in life. And what we're seeing now is the masses, the proletariat, us hoi polloi, being pushed right back down into our place, told what we can do, told how we can do it, and told this is your place in life, this is where you need to be. And this is the trend across the whole of Europe and now the United States. And it's very, very dark and very, very sad that it's happening.
I mean, Dan, the thing about, as we sit here in January 2021 and look at at this modern conservative government led by Boris Johnson, I think most people on the stream and most people that watch this would probably agree with the suggestion that it's unrecognizable from that which stood for election back only just over a year or so ago, back at the end of 2019, and the authoritarianism of this conservative government. It scares me. Does it scare you? And where do you think that authoritarian instinct is coming from? Has it always been there? Did they always want to be able to tell us, like Godfrey says, you only can buy, 2 of this in Tesco's or less, the price is too cheap, or your beer, that you can't pay that. We have to increase the price of beer because it's just not good enough for peasants to drink cheap beer. What do you think about this current Conservative Party?
I think it's probably one of the lowest quality cabinet that we've ever had. I mean, name one personality. Take Boris aside, because like him or not, he is a personality. He is popular. I've met him a couple of times. He's quite jovial. He's very, he's good. He's good with the general public. But I genuinely can't pick anyone out of the cabinet. Priti Patel, appeals to me, but she's been a car crash in some of the latest interviews that I've seen. When she's been challenged about the way that the police have been acting around the country. I don't recognise them. I have to be honest. I haven't for a long time. I've only really understood, if I'm honest, what conservatism actually means in the last 5 years. Before that, if somebody had asked me, I'm not ashamed to say that I wouldn't have really understood what it meant, if you know what I mean. But as I've seen, the last 10 years under a conservative government, it does worry me. It does worry me because there's an agenda. There's an agenda with this party. So we know who the MPs are in the Conservative Party that I would call proper conservatives: Andrew Bridgen, Mark Francois, Sir Desmond Swain. But have you noticed that none of them are in government? There are no characters in government. It's all weak-willed, lily-livered, low caliber. It does worry me because I can't see an end to it.
Well, Godfrey, let's be honest. Are any of them actual conservatives? Are any of them actual conservatives?
No, I had this conversation actually about 10 years ago with Dan Hannan, funnily enough, on a train going out to Brussels. And he said the quality of MP now from which you fish in your pond for your ministerial appointments, he said, has never been so low. And moreover, of course, they have no concept of conservative values or libertarian values. As I say, Lord Salisbury was a great libertarian. Now, if you look at if you look in detail, and you're quite right to mention this, small self-employed small businesses and medium-sized businesses consist of 80% of GDP of the country. It's huge. It is the backbone of the nation, as you quite rightly say, and most people know that. But of course, Bill gets it quite right. They don't care. Now, just look and have a look at a situation of a small business or medium-sized business. The government tell you what contractual liability you have with your employee. So there's a politician sitting at the table when you employ somebody. They tell you how many hours can be worked by that employee, how much holiday they can have, what the pension arrangements are supposed to be, what the leave arrangements are supposed to be, maternity leave, and all sorts of different leave systems. So if you sit down, it's totally hostile to employing anybody. If you speak to any small businessman, the last possible thing they ever want to do is employ anybody. It's a nightmare. Where a big organization, of course, has got a great big human resource system, so they can work through all this. And now, of course, Bill talks about lobbying in Brussels. The small or medium-sized business cannot afford to lobby in Brussels. It's an expensive business, so they're not even there. So they have no political voice. And so we have these problems all the time. But of course, the Sainsbury's are big contributors to the Labour Party, Tesco's to the Conservative Party. This is all about money, as I say, always said. Follow the money. So what you end up with, you have a cartel between big business, bankers and politicians. And of course, for those who know their history, those who understand that history, and I don't use fascism as a pejorative term, this is fascism. Fascism is about big business, banks and politicians getting together to screw the little guy. And that's what we've had. And we've had it for years. Forget about COVID. COVID's got nothing to do with it. We've been going down this route now for decades and decades, and you could not put a cigarette paper in between the government of David Cameron and Tony Blair. You just couldn't put a cigarette. They were exactly the same governments, and they're corporatists, they're statists, and of course the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and it happens all the time. And this is one of the problems we've got. And of course, this government is anti-saver. This government hates savers. It's Keynesian. They follow modern monetary theory, which is about spend, borrow, borrow. It doesn't matter. But of course, how it's paid for is not by tax. It's not by borrowing. It's by degrading the currency. So if you look across to the benchmark for 5,000 years, gold is money. J.P. Morgan said, I think in 1909, gold is money. Fiat currencies, the euro, the dollar, the pound have lost 80% against gold this century, in the last 20 years. Now, anybody who thinks this can go on is mad. But of course, who's the maddest of all? It's the current chancellor and chancellors before him. But of course, he's going to ask my wife, and she's got my credit card and checkbook. She has no concept of how much she needs to save or spend because it's not on her name. Most wives are similar. Well, the chancellor has our credit card. So consequently, it's of no concern to him. He would be a different man if it was his own family wealth, which incidentally is very significant indeed, which I suspect is largely in trusts and trust funds, which is where rich people always put their money, if you can drill down. And Cameron's father, of course, were no different. So the really rich just get richer and the poor go on getting screwed. And the Conservative Party are just the same.
And as one of the people on the stream here has just said, Bill, savings gives you independence. It gives you that ability to make your own decisions, and I would have thought that was a core conservative value. But to Godfrey's point, people are encouraged not to save. They're punished, actually, more specifically, if they do, Bill. So the whole thing, it's not irreconcilable with conservatism, is it? What we see, it's not conservatism.
No, and there's even the spectre of negative interest rates being floated around the place, and wealth taxes, and so many of these things which are, you wouldn't be able to write off the Conservatives doing. Can you believe it? Well, the answer is yes, you can believe it, because they're a fraud. They aren't Conservatives at all. Now, we know this, and I think anyone really who's took an interest in the political scene knows that the Conservative Party aren't Conservatives. In fact, one of the most notable things that was said to me during my time when I was a Conservative by an elder statesman, sort of Conservative person I knew, who said, the trouble with you, Bill, is you mix Conservative principles up with Conservative policies. They are two very different things. And never was a truer word said. I think we need to get across and get past to look to, hopefully, some real Conservatives, is to understand that just because they've called themselves the Conservative Party, they are in no way Conservative. I could call myself Twiggy. I'm not Slim. It doesn't matter what you call yourself. The reality is in your deeds and actions. Every election, they speak conservative words. They give the dog whistle out of all the things many of us want to hear. And then for the next 5 years, they do the complete polar opposite. In fact, they do exactly what Tony Blair would have done if he was still in power. So only the main thing that everyone really needs to understand in this country, not just watching this show, is we do not have a Conservative Party. We do not have a mainstream right of centre option. There isn't one. There's either a centrist big state party or a slightly left of centre big state party, and an irrelevant third one that is good at getting potholes fixed and gets voted in because of that. That's what we've got. And there is not a right-wing option.
Yeah. I mean, Dan, so I think we've there's a consensus view around that the fundamental issue here is that the Conservatives are not conservatives. So that being the case, do you think it would be possible for the Conservatives to reinvent themselves as conservatives, or would that be too radical?
No, because to be able to do that, you would need to have conservatives, proper conservatives, in your party at the higher management of the party, and they clearly don't. They don't have that. For me, I think the COVID-19 will do. Maybe this is wishful thinking, but I've had such a crap year last year. I'm going to do some wishful thinking, so just bear with me.
Okay.
We've got the potential in this country to form a proper Conservative Party, even with all of us, especially with Godfrey's extensive experience in politics and Bill's as well. You know some of the people. You've got the Reform Party, you've got the Heritage Party, you've got Reclaim. All of these, I've sat and researched all three of them today. I've looked at their manifesto, and they're like for like, but they won't come together. That's the only way we're ever going to get a true Conservative Party. The Conservative Party that are in power now, there's no hope for them. No.
But Godfrey, isn't it true to say that the nature of our electoral system here in the UK, first past the post, it's specifically designed to ensure that the duopoly between Tories and Labour, it's two parties in perpetuity. That's it. Wishful thinking about smaller parties, it's not going to cut through. Things will not change. I put it to you.
Well, yes. The voting system embeds it in the same as it does America. You vote red or you vote blue, and it's the same here. And of course, you get exactly the same. It doesn't matter you weren't red or blue. And of course, we are political. The people watching this evening will have political knowledge and political nous. But of course, most people don't. And I love two quotations from Nigel Farage, two wonderful quotations which stuck in my memory. One is he said, "Never underestimate the stupidity of the rural conservative." And I live in a rural part of the world which is conservative, and which he is absolutely right, because they would vote for a whole steaming pile of dog poo if it had a blue rosette on it. They would. And if we cross the river into Pontefract, it would be the same with the red rosette. And the other thing I thought, and this was from the Brexit angle, of course, which was rather good. Another quotation from Nigel was, "The longer the drive, the more stupid the occupant," when he was campaigning. And that also is a truism. But of course, who goes to the barricades when they can pay the mortgage, they can pay the school fees, they've got a nice house, they've got a new car on the drive, it's all on the chucky, it's all borrowed money for no rate of interest, admittedly. So they're living in cloud cuckoo land, and they've got their nice holidays and they go skiing. So the Conservative voter will never go to the barricades. The working classes are completely unrepresented. Labour doesn't represent the working classes. The white working class have no representation at all, which is scandalous. The union gelded. The Labour Party are left-wing middle-class intellectuals, particularly disgusting, I find them. But there we are. And the ordinary guy, and I felt this when I was in the army, of course, where my soldiers were for working class backgrounds, working class of the big towns in Yorkshire. I'm going back many years when the army had bows and arrows. But I knew even then I can tell you that those poor bastards had absolutely no political representation at all. And that's something that I feel deeply about, and that's got to change. That's got to change. It nearly changed this time when Boris talked a good story at the election, and he got lots of working class votes in the north of England. And he instantly betrayed them. He instantly betrayed them with his green agenda. Nobody voted green. We don't want green. They vote green in Brighton because they're gangered up half the time, but nobody wants a green party. But we ended up, we voted blue and we got green, but we didn't get Boris. We got his girlfriend. We got his girlfriend who's a greenie. And I've said for many times, if he doesn't go down the green path, it's no nookie for Boris.
Yeah, well, I think that's a real and present threat, Godfrey. But Bill, you know, just in terms of what's been said in the last by Godfrey and indeed Dan, I think we probably all agree then that there's a big chunk of people that don't really they're conservatives with a small c, I suppose. They've been betrayed instantly by Boris, and there's really nowhere for them to turn. But one of the geniuses of the Trump campaign in 2016, because in the States it's very similar, red and blue, simple enough binary choice. Trump emerged as someone who actually did speak the language of the working class, the soldiers that Godfrey's mentioned, you know, the ordinary blokes, which Thatcher did as well. Do you think someone like that could emerge either from a conservative perspective or completely outside of that and appeal to those millions of voters?
Of course, it can be done, and it was very nearly done in 2015. In 2015, in that election where UKIP famously got the 4 million votes and the one seat, we were so close to breaking through. Where I stood in Dudley North, I got 25% of the vote, you know, and we were really close. It was only, and this is one of the things, it was only the brilliance of Conservative campaign strategy that stopped us making the breakthroughs there, because they started putting out the scare stories about the Scottish nationalists. And I totally foolishly underestimated the importance and value of this, because I lost a lot of people who would have voted for me. When I was going out to rounding up the vote, they said, oh, no, I've got to vote Tory to stop Nicola Sturgeon. And it had sunk in so deeply with people. I thought, well, you're in Dudley. Why are you worried about Jimmy Cranky in Scotland when you're Dudley in Dudley? You know, this is madness. But it worked. Now, we can make a breakthrough. It can be done. It should have been done. In 2015, it should have been done. There was some naivety in the overall planning for UKIP, you know, and UKIP still exists, as I'm bound to say, being a spokesman. UKIP still there. There are opportunities to make these breakthroughs. There are people now totally divorced from the Labour Party and the working class communities in this country. They are absolutely in no way ever going to consider voting Labour again. I can tell you that now. But what they actually need is a party that will put forward strong conservative policies, allow local people to stand in the elections rather than, as we saw with the Brexit Party, just putting in people from nowhere near the area, but happen to have made some interesting financial involvement, I think, to stand in certain seats. Now, that is ludicrous. That is ludicrous. You cannot win without being a pavement politics person. You've got to have the message going from on high, but you've also got to be in touch with the local people, know where they drink, go into the clubs, know what the problems in the area are. You can break through. We so nearly did, but we make mistake after mistake as a movement. And I class this as, all of the disparate parties. As a movement, we make these mistakes. I remember in Stoke, knocking on the door of a nurse, we gave out this lovely I love the NHS garbage leaflet, because that's what people thought the working class wanted to hear. And this nurse said, I don't want that. I want a Trump. I want someone who's going to tell it like it is. Working class people want that strong conservative leader, that Margaret Thatcher kind of character. That's what they want. And just to hark back to one other thing you mentioned, there are these disparate parties. They are all saying the same things. I think even the actor Chappie said he wanted to be a UKIP for culture. Well, there is a UKIP for culture. It's called UKIP. And actually, what these people need to do is stop hating each other and simply say, we've got principles that we more or less agree with, let's work together. I would work with the devil himself if he believed in libertarian values, which I think he probably might.
Egos.
And,
it's all about the egos.
Well, that's entirely what it is, Daniel. It's egos. And there's been battles and clashes in the past of people, but right now, we've got to come back together. We've got to stop the infighting. Look at how bold I am. Most of that was from infighting. It's got to stop. And people have got to come together on principles. There's a market for us. We've got the product. Let's get out there and sell it.
Dan, do you think that one of the things that's enabled the Conservatives to stop being Conservatives is the sheer awfulness of the opposition they've faced in the form of the Labour Party in particular? We leave the Liberal Democrats out of it because they're all but irrelevant. But, Corbyn, during his tenure as leader, was pretty appalling. And going back before that, I mean, they've been serially awful. And I think that people then think, well, yeah, it doesn't matter. No matter how bad the Tories are, Labour's always going to be a bit worse. So we choose, as you said at the very beginning, the lesser of two evils. And there only can be two evils on the agenda. Is that not fair comment?
It is. I mean, if we were to ask Sir Keir Starmer if he could describe the Labour Party's identity, it would be interesting to hear what he's got to say. We've all of us. Sorry, you'll have to excuse me, David. I don't know what your political background is, but my fellow activists below us and former elected officials are very well aware of the poison that Labour are capable of in local by-elections. And, I've had them spit in my face and, they've been all sorts. My family, I would say were all, I'm trying to think, I'd probably say about 80% Labour. Hardcore Labour until Tony Blair's second term. It was Tony Blair and Europe that basically switched my family. And the first time I heard of UKIP was from my grandfather. My grandfather always voted Conservative, but just didn't like the way I always remember him talking to my nan, but my uncles, my dad, they were Labour through and through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But look at them now. This is where we need a proper Conservative Party to sit opposite the Conservative Party. That's what we need, because I think Labour now I think they'll split. I think the current Labour Party, as we see it now, will split because the far radical left have got their tentacles too far now into that party for Sir Keir Starmer to do anything about it. Yeah, I mean, they're not an effective opposition. You can't take them seriously. They call everyone else racists and this, that, and the other when they're the only party, stop me if I'm wrong, that have been investigated by the Metropolitan Police for anti-Semitism and racist.
Yes,
is that
sir.
right? Am I right about that?
You're right. Yep.
I've had years of them calling me every name under the sun. I've attended hustings, and you can barely hear people talk because they're activists. Racist. And lo and behold, 5 years later, who's in the dock? Who's been investigated by the police? So the Labour Party for me now are dead in the water, and it's only the two-party state that keeps them on the the opposition benches. But they're a null and dead force. So the Tories have carte blanche.
So Godfrey, what a mess we're in, because we've got a Conservative Party which is not remotely recognisably conservative. We've got a Labour Party which is not particularly interested in Labour or the working class. And so essentially at the core of British democracy, we've got a massive vacuum, haven't we? And what's going to fill that, Godfrey? Or will it just continue?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not quite sure. But most people feel politically disenfranchised. Vast quantities of Yorkshire, middle-class Yorkshire, just feel that they don't have a home. There's nowhere to vote for. I'm not quite sure whether it might not manifest itself in people simply not voting. I mean, I haven't voted for years. I couldn't possibly endorse Boris, and I couldn't endorse Theresa May and David Cameron. I couldn't do that. I couldn't make my hand go onto the paper and endorse them. My hand would have fallen off. Leprosy would have crept up my arm. So I'm not responsible for these comedians. But what I think we have a little bit of a problem is that they all piss in the same pot. They all go to the same dinner parties. They all went to the same universities. They all think alike. So they think because wokery, they are all highly woke. All the journalists are woke. The BBC is woke. Everybody's woke. But of course, because they don't go to pubs and because they never leave NW2, they don't know what anybody's thinking. It's a surprise. And I remember when Cameron came up here, it was his first trip to Yorkshire, when he was campaigning, I think in 2010, if I'm right. Anyway, he came up here. I was possibly stunned. He said, "Oh gosh," he said, "I know they can't stand Londoners and Lancastrians, but they don't even like each other." And I thought, yeah. You've actually you're starting to understand it. If you spent more time up here, you'd know that we don't like Wesses in East Yorkshire. We North Yorkshire don't like South Yorkshire. We only come together if the bloody Lancastrians come across the border because we don't like them, and we don't bloody well like Londoners either. If he spent more time talking to real people, he'd have known that. But he did. These people have absolutely nothing in common. They don't, but you will never see a politician in a pub except at election time. Never. Well, they didn't play team sport. You can take any single minister or shadow minister. None of them played team sport. You won't find a single picture of them at Oxford or at school in a team game. They're all sociopaths. The biggest sociopath, of course, we've seen recently is Hancock. I mean, quite astonishing. I mean, everything he says screams he should be in a home.
Why does my blood pressure go up when I hear his name?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. And I agree that the opposition, I doubt if any of them have played competitive team sport. Although Diane Abbott possibly might play a very effective role in the rugby team if you put her in the right position as a blocker.
She'd be a very good number two in the middle of the front row where you don't need to read or write.
As long as she's not doing the story.
But actually, so there's a serious point. There's a good point here actually as well, Bill. That there is this homogenous group which Godfrey and Dan have talked about, and they're not the people of the working class, or they're not even connected in many regards, might I say, to reality particularly. And so therefore there has to be an opportunity for what I would call ordinary, normal people, to break through, because ordinary people connect to ordinary people. The people that Godfrey's been talking about, they don't connect to anyone apart from those who attend the same dinner parties and go to the same, night at the operas and so on and so forth. This is not the average Briton. And yet these are the people who are governing the average Briton. So it needs torn apart, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, but you've touched on a very important issue. And to go into the real, probably to be a bit tedious aside from the other things, what we've got to talk about here is selection of candidates. This is how it happens. Now, one of the most egregious and appalling things that happened with UKIP in the past was when Godfrey, who would have won the vote for MEP candidates, was disbarred from standing in it. But the system itself allowed the membership to vote for the candidates. When I went through to be the candidate for Dudley North, the members voted for it. There wasn't an A list, a B list, a C list, although in later years with UKIP, that started to come in when people at the top tried to manipulate things. But that's a different story. What needs to happen for there to be real change is for us to start to look at different systems of selection. Cameron and his cronies took complete control of the levers of power of the Conservative Party and didn't allow the wrong sort to even get to go in front of a constituency party for selection. So you could vote for whoever you want as long as it's one of their candidates. What we need is a system where a party allows almost an open primary in some respects, I think is worth looking at, where you allow people to actually be selected on merit, not on a grading system from above, who the chairman's buddy is, who's donated the most money. These factors shouldn't count. It should be what the membership of a party wants. Then you work together like that. It sounds simple, but it doesn't happen. Certainly doesn't happen with the Conservative Party, and I don't think it happens with the others either.
It doesn't actually, Dan. And I mean, I speak to those. I speak to some people who would like to be conservative perspective, fighting the next general election for MP positions. But everything Bill said is the case. Unless you're pals with the right people, and they're looking after you, you're not going anywhere. It doesn't matter how it's actually not a meritocracy. It's not about how good you might be. It is fundamentally about who you know, and that will completely determine who candidates are. So actually, on that basis, the Conservatives can't get better, because what's working within the system is completely and utterly broke and corrupted.
Well, I think I need to do a bit more research on it, but wasn't it David Cameron that brought in common purpose into the Conservative Party, or didn't I read about that? And if you want to, what I've read about common purpose is equals the word woke, because everything is. I'm gonna do a bit more research into it. But I spoke to Daniel Hannan. He attended an election debate on the European Union. Yeah, so I put on a debate in my town, and Daniel came and spoke, and we talked about common purpose. And I think I'd heard Nick Ferrari mention it, and I thought, I want to know a little bit more about that. And I remember him saying to me, "It's the first time I've ever heard the phrase woke." The first time, this was in 2000 it would have been late 2015, early 2016. I can remember him saying to me that the Conservative Party's not been the same since Common Purpose. Was basically it's the equivalent of momentum, but without the violence. Yeah,
but with all the wokery, that's the problem, isn't it? Here's another thing, Godfrey. The Conservatives are, again, synonymous with law and order, or at least certainly they portray themselves as the party of law and order. And yet, here we are in 2021, and the only law and order that the Conservatives seem to be interested in is making sure people wear masks and hide under the stairs lest the COVID virus gets them. And the interest in maintaining law and order beyond that, actual crime, they seem to be relatively disinterested in that. It's quite a shocker, isn't it?
Well, of course, I've done many a video on my website for some years now. The police have been politicized, and that's largely due to common purpose. It's very difficult to become an assistant chief constable if you're not part of that common purpose setup. 25 years ago, you couldn't have got there if you weren't a Freemason. There are always these unseen, the invisible hand going on. Yeah. But this one is particularly nasty because it's totally unpatriotic. And that is the problem with common purpose and appointees. They are now in the church and they are now in the military. And this is why we have a chief of the Imperial Staff, or the chief of the General Staff, who is highly woke. He's highly woke. So you get university accelerated promotion, you get all this kind of stuff, so they've got the right people. And some police forces are worse than others. So Cambridge Police, Derbyshire Police, West Midland Police are not interested in crime. They have no interest in crime whatsoever, but it's wokery. Up here where I am in Humberside, police force aren't too bad. That's largely because there aren't any of them. But that is a fascinating dynamic. So you can hold London to ransom, you can lock down the bridges if an eco-warrior, and the police will dance around, with rainbow colours. If you go to Hyde Park and say, we want our freedom about the freedoms of the 68 Bill of Rights, and we want Magna Carta, they bash you over the head with a truncheon. And of course, that's reflected in the recruitment procedure, although I have very good friends in the police force. A few very good friends in the police, but generally speaking, your average policeman is a rather bovine individual and easily manipulated. And so we don't have the kind of policeman that we used to have even only 20 years ago, who was a thoughtful guy who could use his discretion. We don't have any of that. That's all gone. They're now just a tool of government. So the fact that we can be under martial law, that we are now under martial law, and there are policemen in certain divisions enforcing it, it makes you wonder, does it not, what they tell their children? Hey, Dad, what did you do today? What did you do today, Dad? I arrested an old lady who was sitting on a park bench. These people have no shame. These are shameless people.
I mean, I have to. I completely agree. And Bill, I mean, I think we'd all be in agreement with what Godfrey said. But it's so shameful to see this, the abandonment of effective policing, the abandonment of law and order, and indeed, actually, the Tories, as far as I can see from my perspective, I mean, they simply have picked up the woke agenda of Labour, messed it around a wee bit, and hate speech and all this kind of nonsense. These are the things that they obsess about, and God forbid someone says something a bit hurty on Twitter. That's the thing that will get the police coming to your door, not if they, if they commit actual crime. So it is this terrible void, and it's been created, Bill, has it not, because really the Conservatives have withdrawn from conservatism.
Yeah, and all of the political policing is very clear to see. I mean, we could do a whole show on political policing and the hate crime agenda and how you're much more likely to get in trouble for saying something hurtful than you are for nicking an old lady's handbag. And also the fact that the Conservatives got rid of thousands of police during their pretend austerity, which actually did no austerity at all, but actually one of the things they got rid of was police, which now they're trying to put the balance right. The reality is that there will never be conservatism in this country as long as there is a Conservative Party in its current format. They are the roadblock to conservatism. They are the false flag. They are the ones who will stop us ever having true conservative values, because the vast majority of people, and who can blame them? Who can blame them? The vast majority of people see the blue rosette. You put it in certain places, as Godfrey said, you could put a pig in lipstick up with a blue rosette on. Yeah. They don't really know or care what the person's like. They vote for them because they expect certain values, law and order, small business, as we got on freedom. And what they get is what we've got now, which is the complete opposite, because they've got, and we have a Home Secretary who I thought would be like Mrs. Thatcher, and who's actually more like Stalin. These things that have happened now are all as a direct result of the Conservative Party perpetrating a continual fraud on the British people, pretending to be Conservatives when they are actually very far from it. They are woke, New Labour, big corporate, big government, and they're a disgrace.
If I can just add now, the Conservative Party for me is now 100% focused on globalism. 100%. That's why they've abandoned conservatism. They're not. They haven't focused on their own people for decades. They're more interested in what's going on globally. That's the last thing I want to say on them.
Yeah, I think, Godfrey, there's a lot of consensus here, which is not necessarily always what people want to see, but it's where we are. And the consensus is that, the Conservatives, I mean, they've got a good thing going, though. They keep winning. They're in power. They're sitting on the internet talking. Boris is in Downing Street. Rishi Dishi's in the Exchequer. They are very effective at conning the British people. And the British people, Godfrey, I put it to you, surely the British people deserve all they get for voting for them.
Yes, but I do believe that we have first of all, Bill's got it dead right. Local people need to make the right decision on who they get. So I've seen people flown in East Yorkshire, flown in from Scotland, Conservatives from Scotland, to take over what should have been given to a local man who's been a Conservative in the region all his life. That's happened all the time. So we're not getting the right people. So that is a very serious problem. But we have another problem, which is the elephant in the room. We have now millions and millions of people working in the public sector whose overall packages are 12% more than the private sector, the wealth creating sector, with their index-linked pension. What's the first thing he did? He didn't say we ought to be giving the girl on the Tesco checkout counter more money, or the Amazon delivery driver who stood up to the plate. He actually praised the teachers who are sitting at home as we speak, where there's no danger to them, no kids get it, nobody under 60 dies from it, hardly at all. They're in no danger, but they're not working. And he praised the public sector. He praised the public sector and said he was going to give them more money. The very group of people who should be chastised for incompetence, he praised.
Yeah, and also
what they should do, what we could stop that, because they have an interest. If you work in the public sector, you have an interest, and it should be a declared interest. And I would suggest if you work in the public sector, you should either be disenfranchised or you should only have one vote, and people who work in the wealth creating sector should have 2 votes. Because at the moment, they're voting for the status quo. The public sector are doing fine. Why would they change the system?
Well, I have to say, Godfrey, I'm in full agreement. For many years, I've railed against the public sector. And actually, but here's the irony for me, Bill, just on this one. We just go on for a minute or two longer, because this is interesting. On the public sector, in my experience, you know, like the public sector votes for the left. They vote for, given half the chance, they'd vote for Labour. They were the people that put Blair in and kept them there. The teachers, the nurses, and the doctors, and all the rest of them. People, you know, and I have huge sympathy with Godfrey said. I have to say, I'm not a big fan, Bill, of the public sector, because they exist care of the generosity of the private sector and our taxes. However, Conservative government bloody well ignores the private sector and feeds even more of our cash to them. So maybe Godfrey's got a point. Maybe they should be disenfranchised. Bill?
Normally, I agree entirely with very much of what Godfrey says. On this one, I think we slightly take different paths. I do think that the public sector is overrepresented. I think that it should be massively shrunk, but I think everyone should be enfranchised in a democracy. I think that's crucial. But actually, the public sector does get an easy ride. There are some people in the public sector who do a damn good job. There are some. But every one of them gets fantastically well rewarded, and job security, the likes of which former steel salesmen like me would never dream of. So I think it's very important that what actually happens is the wealth-creating private sector gets properly nurtured, the public sector gets shrunk dramatically to a much more manageable size where it's less of a drain on the economy.
Final question, same one for each of you. Just finishing this one. Given that the UK has theoretically, legally, however you want to call it, left the European Union, and it's all about realizing, you know, that sovereign Britain trading across the world, do you think the actual real possibilities of Brexit can be realized under a Conservative government or not? Dan, start with you.
So I having worked at a fairly senior level within the civil service myself, I would hope that it would work, but I'm very, very, very skeptical. The reason being, the hierarchy within the civil service are anti-Boris Johnson, anti-Conservative Party, and I was brought in for the EU exit team at the end of 2018 and was very dismayed to find that there was no, for the department that I work for, they gave me basically a blank sheet of paper. They've made no preparations at all. Remember, Conservative government underlying Theresa May. 108 times. Remember Theresa May? I'm sure if you dig deep enough into your memory banks, you might remember her. They made absolutely no preparations at all. Will they see it through? There have been some heads of various departments have got the chop, not quick enough for my liking, but they've got the chop now. And some, Sir David Frost is a true Brexiteer. So as long as he stays in post and as long as he's in charge of, all of the deals and negotiations and stuff as we go forward with other countries, that I think would be good. We've got one problem. Boris Johnson. I wouldn't trust him as far as I can throw him. I'm sorry, I just don't.
Godfrey, what's your thoughts? Tories, can they deliver on the prospect, on the opportunity?
I have seen no evidence I have seen no evidence in the last year under Boris where they look like they're going to grab the reins of a free society, a libertarian society, and start getting. We should be hearing now about how many of the EU regulations we've had over the last 40 years are going to be got rid of. We should be hearing about this. We should be able to talk about a massive deconstruction of all those heavy regulations. We're not hearing that. What I suspect we're going to see is we're going to see a very woke Westminster take the place of Brussels. That's what we're going to see. So when we should free up is that, let's get back, as we finish on Lord Salisbury again, my favourite man, it is the role of government to facilitate the entrepreneurial spirit of the British people and nothing else. I haven't heard anything remotely like that from Boris Johnson or his cabinet. So the answer is no, they're going to drop the pass. They're going to drop the pass.
Okay, Bill, you've got to compete with Lord Salisbury. Final word goes to you. So no pressure. Lord Salisbury, Bill Etheridge. Bill.
Yeah, okay. Ronald Reagan. Most dangerous words you'll ever hear. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And this is the problem that we've got with the current Conservatives. They believe the government has the answer to all our problems. They are not going to take advantage of the vast potential that Brexit gives, the opportunity for freedoms, for liberty, for free trade. It's quite apparent in what they're doing now. They're just as bad, if not worse, than Brussels. Getting Brexit, which we forced them into, was only the first part. The second part of the revolution was taking down the Westminster elite, and that's where we've dropped the ball. And we and all of the viewers and everyone who believes in the same things as us needs to pick that ball back up and fight to take down the Westminster elite. It's just as important as the Brussels elite.
Well, on that note, we've gone from Lord Salisbury to Ronald Reagan. Those of you watching, you can't say we don't give you a bit of culture here on this channel. So look, thank you very much, Godfrey, Dan, Bill. Thanks very much for the conversation this evening. It's been really interesting. Thanks to everybody on the stream for all your comments. Thanks for being part of this. And I look forward to greeting you next week. I think Bill's got a show on the channel tomorrow night. So please make sure you give Bill's show a watch. And I'll be watching it. So make sure you are. And if you're not, I'll find out. And I'll catch up with you folks next week. But that's it from me and from the team for tonight. And see you soon. Bye for now.
Good evening all. Good evening all.